name's Andy Cook. I've been with Mirazon for 5 years. I am a Ruckus-wide certified engineer. I also hold certifications with Microsoft for Windows 7 and Server 2012. I spend most of my time implementing and designing wireless networks and also doing desktop support because it's one of the main things that interacts with a wireless network. So I spend, like I said, about 50% or so of my time creating, designing, and implementing wireless networks for clients, and then that's me.
Hello, I'm Jay King. I spend the majority of my time working on infrastructure, switching, routing, and security. I also do storage, virtualization, wireless, and things of that nature. Been with Mirazon almost 2 years, and it's been a really great experience so far.
So what we're going to talk about and start with, we're going to have basically 3 separate structures and segments that we're going to talk about. The first is what you need to know about Wi-Fi today in terms of capacity, infrastructure support, and onboarding. So those are going to be the 3 topics. I'm going to take some of them. Jay's going to take some of them. We're going to kind of go back and forth. But the first real thing that I want to spend some time talking about today, before we even get into that, is Wi-Fi trends today. The first thing that you're going to notice when you go outside of your building is that, and you go to the mall or you go to another company's location, you're going to notice that everybody has Wi-Fi. Everybody uses Wi-Fi. And so Wi-Fi has become a huge part of how we do business and how we do home life. It's been said before that if you want to have a company meeting or a company meeting or a household meeting, the easiest way to do that is to turn the Wi-Fi off. Then everybody goes to one central location to figure out why it's not working. So one of the things that has changed is the wireless standards. We all probably, for the most part, remember the days of what's called 802.11g, 802.11n. Well, we're now into what's called 802.11ac. When you would go into a Best Buy, an Office Depot, or look on Amazon, you would see an 802.11n access point. You'd see a big letter N on the box. That was the wireless standard that we had from pretty much 2008 to 2014. And what that was a wireless standard that gave you a throughput of roughly 150 megabits per second on a good network. It would sometimes be faster, it'd sometimes be slower. But the thing is that also allowed for both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz frequencies, so it was dual band. It was a pretty big deal. Well, we've now shifted and we're into the next generation of Wi-Fi, which is 802.11ac. Marketers like to call it gigabit wireless. I don't go that far just because you're never going to get quite up to a gigabit in a normal implementation, but you can get newer APs to actually support throughput that's larger than that, but it just depends on how your network's set up on the back end. So 802.11ac is a much faster internet connection. It uses 5 gigahertz to get those high speeds to run across the network. You also have still the old 2.4 gigahertz frequencies available in 802.11ac as well. You have AC broken up into 2 separate categories. You have Wave 1, you have Wave 2. Wave 1 was the first implementation, which brought the faster speeds, which brought the new standard to its first implementation. Now you have what is called Wave 2. That's the big talking point within AC right now, because Wave 2 brings something to the table that wasn't there in the earlier versions. It's what's called multi-user MIMO. It means multi in, multi-out. What that means is when you're using wireless, one person can use the wireless network at a time. It's basically a one-way bridge. When one person passes traffic across it, then somebody else can go across after that one's done. So what you're dealing with, it happens at nanoseconds. It happens so fast it's not anything you'd ever be able to notice, but that's how wireless actually works as a technology. With the Wave 2, with multi-user MIMO, you're actually looking at the devices have 4 spatial streams to actually pass traffic across the wireless network. So you've basically got a 4-lane highway that's capable of carrying people across as opposed to a 1 or a 2, and if you're lucky, a 3-lane highway in the older versions. So with that being said, Wave 2 allows for higher support of number of devices and also faster connections for those devices that are connected. So the next big thing that you hear about and everybody's going crazy about is And a big buzzword is the Internet of Things. What is the Internet of Things? The Internet of Things is literally that. It's an internet composed of things. Those things can be anything from a thermostat in either your home or your office. It could be an LED light bulb. It could be
literally anything.
Literally anything.
Wi-Fi enabled.
I mean, you've got appliances now that have Wi-Fi enabled on them.
Refrigerators.
These things become part of the Internet of Things. Being that that is a part of our reality now, networks have to be planned accordingly to support giving those devices an IP address, and we're going to talk about that later.
It also presents a new security challenge as well, So we've got to be more specific when we are putting devices into our WLANs and planning for that, So yeah, it's really interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, it could for a business to practically work through having the Internet of Things available in their office, they may have to create a completely separate WLAN just for those devices that's completely separate from the rest of the network to make sure those don't talk to anything else. I mean, it is a reality that we're facing.
Especially in those environments that have HIPAA or PCI v3 compliance, that's going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And so, how do we tackle that challenge? It's interesting.
Absolutely. The next area that we want to talk about is analytics. Like, when people attach a device to Wi-Fi, things change. It allows for people to be able to get things that they wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And what are those things that they're able to get? When a user connects to your network, you get some data about them. You get what their computer name is. You might, depending on how you have them sign on to your network, know what type of device they have. You might know their email address. There's things that come along with that you're going to gather depending on how you get those clients onto your network. You can then use that data to figure out, okay, well, I now know this person's email address. I'd like to get in touch with them. You can do those sort of things on a Wi-Fi network. The other thing, too, is that retail establishments are using analytics to say, okay, like where I put this new display up, how much traffic did I actually get across that display? And depending on the type of Wi-Fi network that's behind that, you can sometimes gather that information depending on if you have the right things in place to track that data. Here's another perfect example. You can actually search this online. CNET did an article about the Super Bowl, and they were talking about that the Santa Clara Levi Stadium is one of the most technologically advanced stadiums in the world. They have thousands of APs that are going to be all across the entire stadium that are going to be supporting smartphone usage for people to either stream things from the NFL app or to actually order food from their seats and get it delivered to where they're sitting. So the analytics that are provided from something like that can tell a business a lot of things. For example, okay, we planned for this much food. We had this many people in here, and we ran out of this, and this was ordered a lot. So they'll know next time we have a big event, we need more of this. Or the adverse of that is, hey, we had a whole bunch of stuff that we thought we were going to sell a ton of. We didn't this time, so we know next time we need to order less of this particular type of food. Like there are things to be yielded from the analytics you get when people attach to a Wi-Fi network that are going to create a huge level of value in the network that you put in place.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how the analytics that can come out of your wireless network can drive an industry, particularly as it pertains to inventory or footfall traffic and knowing what to charge for an advertisement in a certain location. We've monetized that kind of thing for a long time, as a marketing thing, but it's always been a question of, well, how much do you charge? And so now there's numbers that can be placed to support what it is that we're either charging or paying for this stuff. Mm-hmm. Really interesting.
Yeah, it's hugely interesting. And the other thing too is that you have vendors that come into your businesses all the time, and when they attach to that wireless network, like they want to be able to use it, and it's important to know, like when they connect, like, okay, I want to know a little bit about them. If it's like a first meeting, you'll get to know some stuff from them depending on how you onboard them to your network, and that's totally a conversation that can be had later, but it's something that there are ways to really go about using your wireless network, not just to get people out to the internet, but to use that network to your advantage as a business.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost an image of another way of presenting the image of your business. Good Wi-Fi, bad Wi-Fi. I mean, we touched on it a minute ago. Some folks out there, I mean, college kids actually picking what college they're going to go to based on what kind of Wi-Fi experience they have. That's a huge paradigm shift in what we're used to, right?
Absolutely. And the last thing that we want to talk about from a trend perspective is the cost of Wi-Fi. Like, what is the cost of getting a good wireless network into your building? It's no longer just the $150 access point / router that you get from Staples that's going to run the Wi-Fi for your business. It's beyond that. It's becoming something that so many devices in a network are wanting to use that those lower end devices just aren't capable of supporting that number of users. And that is a reality that we have to face, because basically for every one person that's on your network, there can be up to, most of the time, at a minimum, 3 devices that they want to attach to that wireless network. So if you have an environment that has 12 users, that's 36 wireless devices that you need to account for on your network that are going to be using that wireless information at all times. And that doesn't even include wireless printers or anything else. That's just the clients themselves and the devices that they want to attach.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, it's no longer a linear equation. It's more exponential than it is anything else, with just how far Wi-Fi has gotten into the market of things.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, too, that we're going to talk about a little bit is, in this discussion, we're going to go, from this point, we're going to go straight to talking about what's called capacity. And when you talk about capacity, what you're dealing with is, when you have a wireless network, there are automatically end user expectations for your network. There are things that they expect. They want to be able to get on the network. They want to be able to use the internet on the network. And they want to be able to do certain things depending on what they're doing. Like, they may want to stream a video. They may want to check their email. It just depends. They may want to play a game. Let's be honest. That's how some people pass the time. But when you have wireless, there's an expectation that automatically comes with it that it will be usable, that it will perform, that it will do what it's supposed to. If not, then that person will go somewhere else to get that experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I don't think your average user that's either visiting our business or is coming for a meeting, at any location, I don't think there's wireless, that's great. No, I think the expectation now is, where's my Wi-Fi? Mm-hmm. It's no longer an option, which is it's a bit of a thought shift for people that own businesses that are hosting those kinds of events.
Yeah, and a good example that's going to be a fairly regular occurrence for a lot of people on this talk right now are going to be when vendors come into your office. They need to pull down a file from Dropbox or something like that to get, so that they can present you with information that they're wanting to talk to you about.
Yeah, exactly. Cloud computing has entered the market, folks. It's here. And so, when I show up on location, chances are that presentation I'm going to give you is going to come out of some kind of online file share. And so when I show up, I'm looking for Wi-Fi so I can get connected to my cloud storage and present, whatever it is that I'm going to present.
Yeah.
It's just kind of the way business is conducted these days.
Yeah, and one last point on the end user expectation is, there was a shift back in the wonderful year of 2008 that changed the world, and that's the smartphone.
Absolutely.
It changed the way we do business. It changed the way that we do life at home. It's changing the way we do education. And there's one thing missing from almost every single smartphone and tablet that's on the market that wants to stay down to a slim size, and that's a network jack. They don't exist. So you have to have the ability, either from a cellular network or from an internal Wi-Fi network, to be able to get these people online to do what they want to do with those devices. Without it, it's going to be a detriment to your business not to have that available, because most people live and die by their smartphone or tablet these days when it comes to doing business, or education for that matter. I don't know of many kids that don't use a tablet or a laptop in some form or fashion, even in as low as elementary school anymore. It's a part of the reality that we live in today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that being said, how do we plan for that? And one of the things you have to plan for are 2 different things. One is your average capacity versus what's called surge capacity. Your surge capacity is going to be, okay, I want to be able to have a conference at our business that's going to have 250 people there. Do I have the network behind me that's going to support that? Or I want to do a conference of 1,000 people. Am I going to be able to support them on my wireless network? And you have to decide, am I going to plan for being able to do things like that, or am I going to make it just to where the users inside my business can be able to get on and use it? Know what you're going to set as far as your expectations for your wireless, and don't expect to be able to do a conference and have 250 people show up if you have a wireless network that you designed to basically take care of only your business. Because that is one of the things that we run into on a regular basis is when I'm designing a network, say for a church, okay, are we talking that you want to have the wireless just for the Sunday school classrooms, or is this something you want people to be able to get on a Bible app in the worship center attached to your Wi-Fi? If that's the case, then we need to plan to have coverage in your sanctuary that's not only going to cover all of the users, but have the capacity to accommodate all of those users. Because a lot of APs can handle a couple hundred clients, if not more, but if you have 2 of those and you've got 2,000 people, it's not going to be able to do its job because you don't have enough APs there to support what you're wanting to do behind it. So there are some things that need to be discussed in designing these networks to make sure that it's done and executed correctly. You also need to make sure that on the back end you're estimating your network. Do I have a DHCP server that's issuing out enough addresses to cover this?
Or DHCP servers because of demand.
Right.
You know, I'm going to show up for church at 9 a.m. in the morning, and my church capacity is 1,000 folks, and the minute they start rolling in, I'm going to start incrementing those DHCP requests. Well, what happens when I DDoS my only DHCP server that I have, right?
Exactly. The other thing too is planning your subnets available for the appropriate amount. I know there was a church that wanted to do a conference, and they got the conference up and rolling, and all of a sudden they had no IP addresses left. Yeah. Well, they had subnetted it for a Class C network with only 253 available addresses and a lease time that was set for a day. So they ran out of IP addresses to give out, so they had to decrease and make a larger subnet to accommodate the number of users. So you need to also, when you're dealing with capacity, estimate and plan your network accordingly how people are going to get onto it. Interference is also it's a fact of life. You have within wireless, you have 2 different frequencies that are used. You have the 2.4 gigahertz frequency, you have the 5 gigahertz frequency. The 2.4 gigahertz frequency is a lot stronger, but it's a much slower wireless connection. You have 5 gigahertz is a lot weaker of an actual signal, but it's a much faster connection. So what you're finding is that most devices nowadays are all dual band. They have the ability to attach with either a 2.4 frequency or a 5 gigahertz frequency. That's pretty much a fact of life with most devices. I know very few that don't have that capability. But what you're finding is that if you go where you're at in your business, you probably can see other wireless networks broadcasting around you. That's because most of those wireless networks still have their 2.4 radios enabled, which is fine. Most people still have those enabled for a good reason. It penetrates through a building a lot better than a 5 gigahertz frequency does.
Absolutely.
If you're at home and you look, you'll see your neighbor's Wi-Fi on either side of you because they're broadcasting out their 2.4 gigahertz frequencies. You have to plan accordingly when you design these networks to know that there may be some APs, if I've got a lot of them, that I'm going to want to just completely turn off those 2.4 radios because you have too many channels on 2.4 that you can use. We like to try and limit the number of frequencies that we use on 2.4 to channel 1, 6, and 11 because all the other frequency or all the other channels that are in between overlap those other signals. So it creates even more interference. And
well, yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that we here have taken in as a planning factor. So when we're looking at network design now, before we would do our predictive analysis based on 2.4 and 5 gigahertz was there. Well, now it's kind of the inverse, right? So we're planning a predictive analysis for 5 gigahertz and then 2.4 after the fact because that's where we're going in the market, right?
Yeah, and also most access points are being configured from a hardware and firmware standpoint to have more devices connected to a 5 gigahertz radio than 2.4.
Absolutely.
A lot of them, Ruckus, for example, they plan on only 25% of devices connected being connected to a 2.4 gigahertz frequency. So with that being said, we're going to move to the next part, which is how do you plan for a degraded state in your wireless? Like what happens when a Wi-Fi AP goes down?
Yeah.
What happens when keeping it real goes wrong?
Because it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. It doesn't matter how well you have designed the network, there will be hardware failures.
It's going to happen in the worst place it could happen. It's going to be that church sanctuary. You know, it's going to be the middle of maybe the Easter service.
Yeah, I mean, but the question is, how do you plan for that? And when you plan for that, you want to make sure that you know what are called dead spots. So a lot of times you're going to find your dead spots are going to be on the far ends of wherever your building ends. That there's that one AP that just happens to cover that end of the area just enough. Well, if that AP dies, then your network out on that end is going to be affected. So you need to make sure to plan in such a way when you're designing a wireless network that if one AP goes down, the devices that are in that area can stay connected by hopping over to another access point.
And inevitably, it's either the CEO or the CFO's office that's out there on the fringe.
Right,
which
exactly.
is funny, isn't it?
Yeah. So keep that in mind when designing networks to make sure to put coverage over those corner offices because they'll let you know if it's not covered.
Oh, yeah.
But the other thing, too, is that we need to shift our thinking. Wi-Fi, anything to do with Wi-Fi has become not just well, that'd be nice to have. It's becoming more of a need every single day. Like I said, with the tablet, with the smartphone, like those things, I mean, those are things that people want to be connected, and you have to plan accordingly. So there needs to be a paradigm shift in the way that we think about these things to really think that, you know what, I really need to think of everything to do with my wireless network is now a need, not just something I would like to have.
Probably one more thing I would touch on is we talked about predictive analysis, but one of the really important things that I don't think happens a lot is the post analysis. You know, the Wi-Fi gets installed, we're using it, everyone's happy, but did we get it right? You know, we took the schematics of the building, we put them into the program, we did the art of figuring out where all the APs need to go for maximum signal attenuation and getting it penetrated through walls and planning for density capacities and all that fun stuff that we do, right? But how do we know we got it right? Maybe what was in the wall was constructed of was not what was in the blueprints, or maybe there's a density differential that the blueprints don't reflect. Or maybe there's a set of cubicles in the middle of the room that's not on the blueprints because that's going to bounce our signal around, right? So the post-analysis of the Wi-Fi is almost as important as the the predictive analysis, and I don't think that happens a lot, or at least that's not been my experience.
Yeah. With predictive analysis, basically, just so you know a little bit more of what that means and what that is getting a floor plan that's to scale of a business and based on construction material and based on signal propagation, how is this signal going to work through this area? So I'm in a building that's got 15 elevators. Like, how am I going to get Wi-Fi around where all those elevator shafts are? Those are things that need to be planned for when you do a predictive analysis.
Absolutely.
You also have to optimize how well the APs are going to do. If you put the AP in a far corner that's surrounded by 4 pieces of drywall and then it's got 6 more walls to get to anybody who's going to use it, that's not a good location for that access point to be in.
Yeah.
So you've got a plan to make sure these go in good places. One thing I see sometimes a lot is I'll go into a building and notice that all of the wireless access points are all running down the hallway. Well, if you've got 2.4 enabled on all of those APs, that's not necessarily a good design, because you've got to remember that when you open up your laptop and you see the SSID for your company, it says Company X, every single one of those wireless access points is basically yelling at the top of their lungs, Company X, over and over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So you want to basically set up, you want to get away from looking at putting things straight down the middle of a hallway and kind of almost staggering them so they aren't seeing each other directly like that. Yeah. Also, depending on how you orient the AP determines how the signal propagates out of it.
This is always a fun one to talk about because it really does make a difference.
Yeah. For example, I went into a business once, they were having issues with their Wi-Fi. I go in, I set up, I start looking at things, and I notice that the AP is mounted vertically on a wall, and the person that's on the other side of that wall is complaining about a poor wireless signal. Well, what happens when you change the way that an AP is actually placed, the way that the signal pattern comes out, even if it's an omnidirectional antenna, changes. You're going from basically you're taking a semicircle and putting it up on its side. So, of course, the pattern is going to change. And then the signal band and the strength, like which AP am I connected to? Am I on a 2.4 or 5 gigahertz frequency right now? depending on what you do is going to determine how things work.
It really does make a difference.
And the last thing we want to talk about is what's called mesh. Mesh is the ability to have an AP to be an extension of your environment that's not connected to a particular network cable. So basically you're allowing two wireless signals to basically connect to each other and extend your network. Now with mesh, keep in mind that there are some things that happen because as you connect devices without a network cable, you basically take the max throughput of that AP and you cut it in half.
Absolutely.
So you're going to get slower connections, but you're still going to get reliable connections. It's just when you go like past really 2 or 3 hops out, that's when it gets kind of to a point where you don't want to try and mesh something that way. You want to get network cables run to those locations. But mesh is an option if there's just some areas where you're like, I cannot get a network cable here. What do I do? That's when mesh comes in.
Exactly. You know, we can throw money at a problem, but is that always the right answer? And I would like to say no, unless folks just have endless, amounts of money, which doesn't seem to be a trend these days. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. You want to get coverage. You don't want to have to place this absorbent amount of money out there to get coverage. And so mesh is a good planning factor when you're painted into a corner.
Yeah, and I'm going to disassemble my soapbox at this point. But the one thing that I will say is that there is really, really good value in proper planning for the implementation of a Wi-Fi network. The value that comes from planning that well will go beyond the years that the network will actually be in place, because once it's planned out well, it'll be like, okay, I had a great network, but we're now on the next iteration of wireless. I'm just going to change out my APs, get a new controller, and move on with what I already had in place. It takes away the need to basically reinvent the wheel every single time that a new standard of Wi-Fi comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. All right, so it looks like we were coming up on a poll. All right. So the poll here is, what Wi-Fi solution do you have? We're going to pause for a second here just to let folks respond.
Okay, it looks like we got some results coming in, and I'm seeing some pretty impressive numbers for Ruckus. Got a couple of Aruba and some others. With those of you all that are on an other network, would you please be so kind as to just put in chat what that other wireless network you might be running is? I'm just curious.
Wow, I'm surprised that no one has said Cisco yet.
I'm surprised at that too.
Or Aerohive for that matter. Very cool.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for taking the time to answer that question. We're going to move on to our next topic now. Like I said, if you have any of those other ones that weren't listed on that poll question, go ahead and throw them in the chat window. I'd just be curious to know what you have.
All right. So moving on, we're going to talk about infrastructure. So, Andy talked about what our new technology is out there when it comes to Wave 2 and the techniques and planning factors that go behind selecting APs and making sure that we get them in the right spots. Okay, so we've gotten there. We know what we're going to pick. We figured out where we're going to put it, and then we're going to do it. And so one of the things that kind of gets left behind sometimes is infrastructure. So I've got this new awesome AP. It can handle, between 300 and 500 devices connected to it, and it can also have a theoretical throughput of maybe, somewhere around 1.5, 1.8 gigabits of throughput a second. Oh, so it's more than 1 gig, right? So I've connected my AP to a gigabit switch. My AP is now capable of almost 1.5 times my normal throughput that I'm used to. That's a bit of a difference. So I've got my one Cat5e or Cat6 cable out there. Now I've got to run another one because I've got to bond the cables together to get the throughput I need to be able to get the benefit of all the horsepower on that AP. And so what we find is that, folks are planning for these newer style networks and not understanding that there's second and third order costs associated with it. And specifically when we talk about switching. So we need switching that can support the data rates, or we need extra cables run from our current switching to support the data rates the AP is going to hand off to us. And so, we don't want our switches to become a bottleneck. And then in turn, we've got to transport that across the network, and we've got to get that probably to some sort of internet source. So we're probably going to put that through a firewall or a controller to get it there, or both. And so now we've got, a dozen or so APs out there that can handle 300 to 500 devices. We're planning for, X amount of devices connected to our network. Let's just use a number of 1,000. Well, how many sessions can 1,000 devices generate? How much bandwidth can they pull?
And another thing, too, that was asked about in the chat but is important as well, am I going to be doing any voice over IP over my wireless network as well?
That's a great question.
Because that's going to change how you implement your wireless network as well, because most wireless networks nowadays have the ability to turn on QoS built into the Wi-Fi controller that you're using. So that is something that is capable of being done, but you have to design for it.
Or even at the AP.
Yeah.
With the new devices that are coming out into the market, and this is a great question, it's always fun to talk about this. With the new APs that are coming out into the market, we're actually getting QoS to happen at the AP, which is great. That's what we want, right? We need our voice traffic to get in and out of that access point and to its destination as fast as possible, so we don't get the and the garbles that we see sometimes with wireless technology. So absolutely, that is a planning factor, and I'm really happy that someone brought that up. Circling back around, we've said we want to plan for about 1,000 devices, and it's again no longer linear; it's exponential because things are cloud related. We have all these mobile devices in our hands, and so we're going to see session capacities, packet throughput, and bandwidth throughput, and prioritization come into play. And so, okay, so we have this awesome AP. We've got the bandwidth we need to our switches. Well, now can our firewall handle that much throughput? Because we've got to secure our network in some way. So it always becomes another planning factor. Same thing with controllers and bandwidth available to get to the internet. And we've got to prioritize that bandwidth. We've got to make sure that we're preventing things that are bandwidth hogs from dominating the conversations with the devices that are out there, because if we're a church, and we kind of refer to churches because they're unique, right? And we do a lot of church IT.
Yeah.
It's a fun thing to do. So folks are out there and the sermon is kicking off and they're using their phone as their Bible, and we don't want the 7-year-old in aisle 3 that's streaming Netflix on their headphones to absorb all the bandwidth when someone's trying to look up, John 3:16, right?
Exactly. And on that note too, that there do need to be plans put in place to figure out, okay, how am I going to limit that guest network? Am I going to do it at the control level? Am I going to do it at the firewall level? And those are conversations that you have to have, because your wireless touches every part of the network anymore.
Absolutely, I completely agree. So we're going to have to put some kind of access control at the AP, at the boundary point. We're going to have to shape that across the network. We're then going to have to prioritize it through the firewall or whatever is our security device handing off to the internet, so that we can be efficient and mindful with our bandwidth. And so I said all of that to say this. Your infrastructure can really hinder, at this point, your Wi-Fi performance, which now leads to the third bullet, which means they're no longer mutually exclusive. Your infrastructure now has to be able to support your Wi-Fi, not the other way around, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's a completely different shift from how people have been doing their networks in the past, and it's just, like I said, we don't have network connection jacks on Wi-Fi enabled tablets and smartphones. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that takes us into our next slide here, and we touched on this a little bit already, prioritization of services. Do I want to prioritize my DNS query over my web session? Well, maybe, because if I can't resolve the domain name that I'm trying to get to, what good is it for my web traffic to be the priority? Mm-hmm. So, it's the mental conversations that we have to go through in the planning factors of how do we organize this thing now that it's wireless, because of how much capability that we're being given.
Yeah, because what will happen is if you don't plan these things accordingly, you've got all of this data going up to an AP, but that AP can't do what it needs to with all the data that's coming up to it, and it's basically like trying to push the water coming out of a fire hose through a straw.
Absolutely, yeah. So Scheduling of time-of-day service is always a fun topic to talk about. Sorry, I got a little tongue-tied there. That's a tongue twister. Anywho, so scheduling time-of-day services, we set up these wireless networks. We plan them out, right? And then we got to think about security. There are folks out there that just don't like or enjoy hacking networks, and wireless is going to penetrate outside of your building, and some folks just drive around and see that as a challenge. And so we have a guest wireless network. The guest wireless network is probably not going to be inherently as secure as our corporate wireless network, because we can control that through either MAC filtering or radius-based authentication, some more complicated factor of getting people onto our network. Whereas guest networks are generally a little more open, we're a little more free with them. Maybe they don't have a password, or maybe it's just a splash page that makes you agree to some terms before you go on into the network and get access. Well, scheduling time-of-day services is one way we can reduce the footprint of our attack surface. So if we know we're an 8 to 8 business or a 6 to 6 business, let's just go ahead and schedule that guest network to be available from 8 to 8 or 6 to 6. And the rest of the hours of the night, when those that are going to travel around the parking lots and see the challenge, well, let's just not present them with the challenge. And it's one way of looking at it. Again, go ahead.
Yeah, there's actually a question that came up that is a wide open network, guest network a liability, and the answer is yes.
Oh, absolutely. We've dealt with this repeatedly.
Yeah, what a perfect example of this is if you have an open guest network and it's available all the time, anybody can come up and use that if they pull into your parking lot and it bleeds over into your environment. But what happens when Creepy Joe at 1 o'clock at night comes in and decides to start doing things that are not legal on your network, they're not going to be looking for necessarily his computer. They're going to be wanting to know where that was coming from, and they're going to come back and point to you. There is a liability that we hold as being the people providing an internet to clients. Like, that does become an issue. So having a time-of-day service, like, okay, I know that most of the people here at Mirazon or I know most people at, say, a church are gone by every day by 6 except on Wednesdays, because Wednesdays they're there till later. And you can change these time-of-day services to stop at 6 and not come back on until 7 in the morning.
Absolutely.
But on Wednesday, you can let it run till 9 o'clock at night, and then it shuts off. Yeah. There are ways to control that, which limits the liability that you then take on as the one providing that internet service.
Yeah, you can get very granular. You can get very specific with what your business model is in supporting time-of-day services. And just to give an example of where we ran into this in the market real fast, we have had more than one client approach us saying that their internet provider is threatening to terminate their service because they have an open wireless network and people are downloading music and movies illegally. And basically it's the cease and desist. You stop this or we turn you off. And so that's where we get into how do we reduce that footprint. Time-of-day services, do we prevent certain protocols from happening across the wireless network at the guest guest SSID and things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting problem to tackle each and every time. Yeah. Because everyone's different, right, in how they conduct their business.
Yeah, and the good news is, though, is that when vendors and manufacturers are taking these things into consideration as they make these devices, and they're putting things in them like application layer controls, they're putting in ways to prioritize and limit ports and creating policies that will let you control things down to the most ridiculously granular level possible.
Absolutely. I mean, you can take draconian measures if required. It's kind of cool the level of control we're getting over these devices these days. All right. Well, I think we beat that one to death. Want to move on?
Close to death. It's still breathing a little bit.
All right. So we have another poll here, and it's you currently have a Wi-Fi security policy, and so it's good. Interesting follow-up question here for what we just talked about, the issues that open networks present to us. So we'll take just a minute here, and we'll let the results come in.
Okay. Well, cool.
Wow, that's awesome, folks.
That actually is pretty impressive, the number of yeses that we're getting, so kudos to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other part on that Wi-Fi security policy is When a guest connects to a network, a part of that is, do they get an IP address on the same subnet as everything else in my business? Mm-hmm. That's a really, really simple way to kind of secure your internal network away from the rest of the world. So that's one thing, because we got a couple I don't knows, that's a really concrete way. It's a very simple security policy, but it's still a security policy of some sort. They get on a completely separate IP range that doesn't allow for them to go to my internal network.
Yeah, and if that's something that you want to talk offline after the webinar, just give us a call and happy to help you work through that problem. All right, onboarding, always a fun topic. Wait, we have a question?
Yeah, so define policy.
Okay, well, policy here is being used as a loose term. So access control list at the access point. For example, I am not going to allow the common ports that BitTorrent clients use to go through my access point. Or at the firewall, I have a policy that is UTM, or Unified Threat Management, enabled, that is looking at application layer or web-specific protocols as they fly through and preventing that stuff from going on out to the larger internet there. So just some way of preventing the things that ought not go across our wireless and wired networks on out to the internet to reduce liability.
Yeah. And with that being said, like a policy is just that. It's something that you have to, as the business, with the appropriate parties, have conversations of what do we want that to look like for us, because every business is unique.
Yeah,
there's some businesses that need to have certain things locked down that others don't. So it just depends, and those are conversations that we're happy to come alongside you and have, but they're definitely not going to look the same for every single business. The next thing that we want to talk briefly about is onboarding.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about onboarding, what we're talking about is how does user X get to network Y?
And what is that experience? Because it's important.
Yeah, and if for example, I can tell you the number of times, and we're going to actually have a poll question here in a minute that talks a little bit more about this, but your onboarding experience of how you actually get to use a wireless network is crucial. If it's too cumbersome, if it takes too long, if it doesn't work, your likelihood of trying the next time you go to business X is going to be slim to none. You're just going to be like, you know what, I'm just going to use my own data right now. And that's another thing too, people are more and more requiring the need to use a wireless network as opposed to their cellular data, because the days of the wonderful internet or the wonderful cellular providers handing out free data plans to everybody are over. Everybody's on a data plan that's limited to some sort of number of gigabytes per month, or megabytes per month. I've seen. I mean, when it started, everybody got everything, and then they realized, wait a minute, we can monetize this. So they're like, we're going to charge for how much data they use. So being able to connect to a wireless network has become a very important thing for people who are out on the go. So how you're able to get to that wireless network that doesn't use your data is important.
The inverse of it is true as well. You don't want it to be too obtrusive, right? Like, you don't want them to have to fill out their birthday, their phone number, their email address, where they live, who their next of kin is, type of blood they have in their body. We don't want them to feel like this is an information collection engine so that we can just market them to death. It really is just a way of being able to, validate they're a human and that they have good intentions on getting on our network, and that they have a good experience when they do get on there.
Yeah. Because, I mean, we all know what it's like to get inundated with things, and we all have our own personal email accounts that are nothing but advertisements from everybody.
Absolutely.
So we have a poll question. And that poll question is, have you ever been connected to a Wi-Fi network and not been able to do anything?
I can think of a few hotels that come to mind.
I think we've gotten 100% on this question.
Oh, man, look at that. That's awesome. There's, that was very fast. I think there's some anger behind some of that.
Yeah. All right, well, that's
very cool.
92% voted and 100% of them said yes. There are numerous things that can cause not being able to do anything to be the reality that you face. It could be that the network itself is not able to support them because there's too many people trying.
Yeah, absolutely.
It could be that there is just...
It all goes back to those factors that we talked about early on. Surge capacity, getting the user on the wireless network, making sure that we can hand out IP addresses effectively, making sure that we have some way of just, presenting a pane of here is what you do to get on the network. It's amazing at how complicated and convoluted sometimes this gets, and just ineffective in general.
And this is one that people don't think about a lot, but I did want to bring up, is pre-shared keys are great as long as that key doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using a pre-shared key and you go to a business where you had the pre-shared key, you don't go back for 2 or 3 months. The next time you try to get on, it's changed. You're not going to be able to get on. You might not realize that that's why you can't get on unless they have it posted on pieces of paper throughout the business. Hey, the Wi-Fi network's changed.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that a little bit, right? The techniques of being able to get folks onto your network who are not permanent staff or employees, people that are there just on a regular basis. So Andy just talked about pre-shared key or open. Those are methods that work, but I don't think are preferred, honestly, in the current threat environment. So social media is another way to get folks on. A lot of controllers now, or even APs that are cloud-based controlled, are integrating social media as an onboarding platform. And so what happens is when you connect to the network, you're presented with enter your Facebook credentials, enter your LinkedIn credentials, enter your Google Plus credentials, and we will let you onto the network. And so that authentication is happening through an API, and there's some back-end under the hood stuff, but basically all it is you're using social media to get on to the wireless network, and then the person or the network that you're using is going to capture a small amount of information about you just to validate who you are. Then we have captive portal. Andy, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, a captive portal could be something where when you go on, you click to the network and you see the little upside down triangle at the bottom of your computer has a yellow triangle with an exclamation point,
mm-hmm.
which will say, hey, you're almost there, but when you actually open up a web browser, it takes you to a place that's basically a portal that you log into with either it could be also an extension of social media, it could be a predefined username that you've been given, it could be an email address. There's some way to basically get something about you before you go out to the internet.
And you've probably used this and not known it, or known it and used it.
Yeah.
But if you do a lot of flying around, kind of like we do, you get on the plane and you sit down and it's a Wi-Fi enabled plane. And so the first thing you do when you connect to the wireless network is you get hit with the portal, the captive portal, that's asking you to pay for your Wi-Fi while you're on the flight.
Yeah.
Well, so that's a monetized version of it, but still, that's what it is. It's a captive portal.
Even anywhere that takes you to where you have to agree to terms of use is still considered a captive portal. It's a more generic captive portal, but it's still somewhere that's stopping you from going until you agree to X.
Yep, absolutely. And so then we move on to radius and certificate-based, authentication. This has gotten really popular. So this is for the corporate environment for the most part. I have folks in my environment, and I want to use their domain credentials to get them onto the network. I'm going to use some form of radius-based authentication to do that. Or in the case of trusted certificate-based, I'm just going to allow that person or device who I've issued a certificate to get on my network because, well, I'm trusting their certificate that I issued to them. And then controller integrated. Andy, do you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, a controller integrated is where if you say, for example, you have a database that sits on your controller, or you have one that on your controller talks back to an environment where you have a list of users that are a preferred way of doing it. Ruckus within their zone directors and their smart zone controllers, they have the ability to create a guest network where you have what's called guest pass authentication. So basically you have a user who is responsible, such as an admin or a secretary or somebody up front, who logs into the controller to generate a guest pass for a user. So that person is given an X amount of days that is available, or X number of hours that the particular guest pass is available, or a login, and from there they get on the network with that login that was created by them by somebody on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the last one, Jay and I are going to kind of bounce back and forth about, but this is a big one, is Ruckus Wireless actually acquired CloudPath, which was a onboarding solution provider back in September?
That sounds right.
Yeah, it was around
August,
September time.
September area. Yeah. So CloudPath is an onboarding solution for wireless networks or networks in general. And we're starting to see it gain a lot of traction in the education environment. So for both staff and student, this is a good plane in which to get them onto the wireless network. And it's becoming kind of becoming a household name, I think.
Yeah, and the way they do it is very unique because it's all done on the back end with certificates.
Absolutely.
And that's how they're able to get this done. But I've seen it demoed live, and it's literally opening up a phone, looking for the SSID, hitting it, and as soon as they hit the button, a cert comes down and says, "Here's your certificate. You install it, you're done." And then you're on the network.
Then there's some interaction. You're going to be presented with a web page. You're going to have to choose some options. And so this is where it kind of gets really cool, is it's a single plane of aggregating people onto your wireless network, whether they are trusted or untrusted, so employee or guest. And so what that means is you'll be presented with a splash page that is completely customizable to your business. It's not going to have the CloudPath Networks swag hanging all over it.
Yeah.
You own it. It's your product, right? And so you can customize it accordingly. But basically what happens is you're presented with, are you an employee? Are you a staff member? Well, okay, click this button. If you're not, you're a guest, click this button. And then if you're an employee, you put in your employee credentials just like you would log onto your computer. A certificate is passed to you. You are now trusted for X amount of time. And then you're on the network.
Yeah, and the other thing that's nice too is that certificate can then be revoked by an admin at any time. So you have physical control over how a person is able to access your network.
Well, and here's one more cool management feature, right? Because let's face facts, folks. We got to manage these devices, and we got to manage these accounts, and we've got to spend time on that kind of thing. And here's what's neat: is you can set a limit to where that certificate is valid. And so, if we set 30 days as our limit, and a staff member logs in, and 31 days later they've not come back onto the wireless network, or they're going to be required to re-onboard, that certificate is going to age out. And so it makes management a lot easier for both staff or employee and guest, or student in the case of education.
And for us on the back end, as the admin, it makes it easier as well.
Absolutely. All right, so it looks like we have a question here that's going to be a giveaway for a gift card. I'm being told this is a $50 gift card. Oh, all right.
Y'all play nice.
So the first person to answer the question gets the gift card. Are we ready? All right, so here's the question. What wireless vendor was first to market with a Wave 2 AP?
We're looking.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of responses.
So it looks like
We're looking, folks. Just a second.
we're working on it. Okay,
Our winner is?
Rich Cusick.
All right, Rich. Well, you just won $50.
I may have butchered your last name, and for that I apologize.
We will have our folks contact you after the webinar here, and we'll work on getting you that gift card.
Okay. All right. Now the last thing that we have here for you are two more slides. This one here, or one more slide actually,
this is
and
the last slide.
We'll send out the slide deck when this is done too. But is some blogs that have been written by different associates and people at Mirazon about different things to do with Wi-Fi. So all of this stuff here will give you a lot of insight, and will give you some things to think about, and it will also show you the different products that are available by basically one of our main partners, which is Ruckus Wireless. So you can kind of look at this and get an idea of what's going on, and dive just a little bit deeper than we've even gone on this webinar on a few things.
Yep. And so we've been sitting here talking to you for quite a while now, and want to open this up as an opportunity for you to ask questions to us. So we'll stand by while the questions come in.
The answer was the first person to market with a Wave 2 AC access point was Ruckus. The model number was the R710.
Oh, yes. Great AP.
Okay, so you want to know a little bit more about analytics. What kinds of things do you want to know about analytics? Because that whole discussion can go pretty deep, and it can also go pretty wide.
Yeah, I mean, it can go as deep as, being able to estimate footfall traffic across your building using your wireless network, or as simple as, how many people connect to the network at different time of day, or what protocols are being used at a certain time of day, so that you can then change your traffic shaping policies. That's a pretty broad topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are other things that can be done as well. And if you go to Ruckus's website, they have a couple of products that help to do this sort of thing. One is a product called Spot, which is their one that usually is used to analyze footprint, and then they also have another one that tells a little bit about what the users are doing called Smart Cell Insight.
Yep.
Those are two products that are available from them. They integrate directly into your wireless controllers and allow you to actually gather and aggregate that data and also report from that data as well.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Ruckus, we've talked a lot about CloudPath, but there's other vendors out there that are doing these exact things, and Cloud4Y is another one.
Yeah.
Andy, do you want to talk a little bit about Cloud4Y?
Yeah, Cloud4Y is a product that allows for you to basically create a splash portal that people can log into that allows for them to basically be marketed to based on how they're using the network, and it gives the ability to put things out in a splash portal that gives them access to coupons. It's also something that you can do. You know a little bit about that person by allowing them to log in with their social media account. You've got a guy who is they use a product to make this work called FogSense. So you put this in, say, a retail establishment. You notice that Joe somebody is standing in a lingerie store, and he's been standing there for 20 minutes. Well, he's probably there with his wife. You can shoot Joe somebody a coupon for the mall to the restaurant that has a coupon for a free beer.
Or my personal favorite, the massage chairs, because what's a better thing to do than get a massage while you're waiting on your wife, in Victoria's Secret or something. Two birds, one stone.
Yeah, Meraki is another product that is, it's actually owned by Cisco. They are another wireless vendor. They have a cloud controller which has a lot of integrated features that do offer some of these things as well. Another one that does really good onboarding from a wireless perspective is Aruba. Aruba has some built-in things that are built into their APs that allow for really fast onboarding as well.
Yeah.
That says, the question is it better to hire someone to do the site planning, or is it realistic for an IT guy to be able to do it himself? What tools are recommended?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's interesting. The tools to do a super accurate on-site, boots on ground, walk the building site survey are actually kind of expensive when you get down to it. So if you're going to want someone to walk your building, my recommendation, again, this doesn't make it right, but my personal recommendation is to get someone to do it for you. A, they're going to know how to use the tool. B, the tool is just expensive, and it's probably going to be something you use once or twice. But now if you're going to do predictive analysis based on schematics, that's a different story, Andy. What do you think?
I think if you're going to do predictive analysis based on schematics, one thing to do is to contact us, get us your floor plans, and we'll actually help you with that. If we're doing just a predictive analysis of your floor plans and you don't have any wireless right now, I actually can sit down and analyze that for you, and that's actually something we just offer as a service.
That's true.
So we can actually do that for you. If there's any interest in that, what we do is we take your network, we design it out, and show you, okay, this is how many APs you're going to need. Here's how much all those APs are then going to cost. Then there is, at that point, when we would talk about our engineering services to be able to provide you with the help in putting the APs in place, getting the controller online, and doing all those things. We recommend, we need the floor plans for sure, and they need to be to scale. They can be in a PDF or a JPEG, it doesn't matter. Photos are always good to provide as well, just because it gives us an idea. We can look at those and kind of determine what construction material it is.
Well, not so much just the construction material, but what's in the room. That's always the important factor. And here's a great example. So we get a schematic, and we see these nice, open, empty rooms. Well, we know there's furniture in there. But is it a desk? Is it cubicles? How tall are the cubicles? Because it all makes a big difference in how that signal is going to propagate across that room. And so that's different planning factors on where the AP goes, how hard it's going to broadcast, what frequency it's going to broadcast on. Those are all just really important things to know. So really it's a combination of building schematics and pictures of the environment, that these APs are going to go into.
And knowing the construction materials that the building is made of.
Completely agree.
So like if you have a nice office, but every single wall in that office is concrete, it's going to be very different than if all the offices are made of drywall. And those things are things that need to be taken into consideration. Another one that sounds really silly, but if you have cinder block walls, are those cinder block walls filled with concrete down the cores, or are they hollow? Because if they're hollow, it's going to propagate through that cinder block a lot easier than it is than if the cores of those cinder blocks are filled.
Or even in drywall construction, is it wood stud walls versus metal stud walls? Those all play a huge factor in planning out these networks. All right, we have another question here.
It says, are there any firewall features and visibility planned for Ruckus?
Well, so yeah, we integrate our Ruckus wireless technology in with our firewall solutions that we provide. So, for example, we're going to onboard through radius authentication. Well, I kind of want to know what those users are doing at my firewall level. So I present that radius information up when the conversation happens to my firewall. So now I'm tracking sessions at the IP/user level because, we're using DHCP. And so I want to tie that user login information into my firewall so that when I get a threat report or a no-no report because someone did something they didn't want, I told them not to do, I want to know who that was. I need to go have a conversation with them and, hey, we need to talk about the acceptable use policy again.
Yeah. And another thing, too, though, is that one of the things you need to remember that, especially with, like, the way everybody does Wi-Fi is a little bit differently, but, like, take, for example, Ruckus. When you put up APs and you put up a controller, those APs, the way that they pass that traffic is it goes from device to AP to switch out to the internet. They don't actually go back to the controller, which helps with you being able to get the best possible throughput. There are some controllers that actually pass the traffic back through and work in similar ways to the way that a firewall does. But with Ruckus, you're usually looking at a different product to go along and support, like your firewall, doing the accounting and tracking that traffic for you, because you're just basically creating one more space that the information can get stuck by having it go back through the controller.
Right, and the exemption to that is PCI v3 compliance for processing machines. So we specifically want to make sure we protect that information, and that is going to be tunneled back to the controller on purpose. So that we can protect it across the transport to the point of the data plane before we release it out through the firewall. We want to make sure we have an accountability of where that traffic's going because, hey, folks, listen, credit card information is the thing that folks are going after out there, and protecting that information is really important. And I know all these new credit card processing machines coming out have the Wi-Fi option on them because we get businesses calling us all the time saying, well, I've got this thing, it's wireless. How do I protect it? And it's becoming something that's a bit of a challenge, and thankfully there are ways and techniques to handle that. All right.
All right, cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time and for just sitting here and listening to Jay and I talk for a little while. We hope you enjoyed your pizza, and if you have any questions, this is not available, but I will. You can actually get in touch with us. You look on the Mirazon website. You can go to contact us, and Jay and I both have bios up there that tell a little bit about ourselves and have ways to get in touch with us if you need anything at all.
Absolutely. Thank you all for attending.